So for more on the situation in Libya and what it means for global oil markets, let's bring in former U.S. Defense Secretary William Cohen. He served under President Bill Clinton from 1997 through 2001. He's now chairman of the international consulting firm, the Cohen Group. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Secretary Cohen, thank you very much for joining us. Give us your perspective on what you've described in the past as a disconnect for the American policy with our mission in Libya. Are we seeing any change in our mission, and is this supporting President Obama's position in Libya now?
Well, the mission has changed by virtue of what's taken place on the ground. My comments before were directed at the president for having declared that Gaddafi must go, at the same time having a mission which was narrowly defined as protecting the Libyan people against Gaddafi forces. So there had to be a connection that was not being made at that time. Part of the difficulty was that the president was also restrained by the UN Security Council resolution, which confined it to more of a humanitarian type of mission. And so in essence, what took place is a bombing campaign was intensified. I wanted to see it intensified even more in order to accelerate the fall of Gaddafi, because once you declare Gaddafi must go, Gaddafi can't stay. Otherwise, it's a defeat for the United States, for NATO, and for other countries involved in the coalition.
Secretary Cohen, from what you know about the region and the country, are the rebels really able to put together a coordinated government?
We don't know. That's the big unknown at this point. We're going to go from a period of great euphoria, assuming that the remnants of Gaddafi's forces either lay down their arms or are defeated. We're going to have this period of euphoria, which will, I think, dissipate quite quickly. And then the reality will set in. What do we do now? How do we put this country together? Will we seek reconciliation? Will we seek inclusion? Will we learn from the mistakes made in Iraq and Afghanistan? Those are big questions that the Libyan people have to really address and to answer. I think it's one of the reasons why President Obama was talking and mentioned on a couple of occasions inclusion and reconciliation. If they're going to pursue a policy of retribution, then the chaos is likely to continue. You'll have difficulty putting any form of government together. There's not a history of the rule of law. There's not a great bureaucracy that's been established. And so all of this is going to become important to build institutions which allow a country to function, to have some kind of a rule of law that international enterprises can then say, we want to do business in Libya. Well, we have to have a form of commercial activity that will allow companies to make those kinds of investments or to acquire their resources.
Secretary Cohen, previously, what was the U.S. military participation in the Libyan revolution? I guess we could describe it as such.
Well, it was when the actual military campaign started, the United States, when it finally decided to get involved. You may recall that Secretary Gates stated that it was not in our vital national security interest to get involved in Libya. Once the British and the French decided that they were going to support the rebel effort and the Arab League endorsed a no-fly zone, then I think the president had very little choice but to join in that. The major activity that was taken at that time was led by the United States. After that bombing campaign, because of the assets that we have that could, in fact, penetrate Libyan airspace with minimal risk, I shouldn't say minimal, with reduced risk, then the president decided to turn it over, the major part over to our allies. So then he was accused of leading from behind. I think it was an unfair accusation, because I think it would have been a mistake for the United States to be the lead country in Afghanistan, Iraq, and then a third Arab country. I think that would have been a mistake. So I think the president was right to say, over to you now. We've taken the heavy load here of going after these air defense systems. Now it's up to you to take the load from here. We will still provide intelligence information in terms of identifying troops and where they are, and then to pinpoint them for precision-guided munitions. But I think the United States has played it about right at this point.
Secretary Cohen, based on your experience at the Defense Department and also the subsequent knowledge of what happened in Iraq, what role should outside military forces or advisors assume in Libya if indeed Colonel Gaddafi is now out of power?
I think much depends on the will of the Libyan people. I don't think that any of us are in a position to now dictate to Libya, this is what you must do. I think the Libyan people, through their own courage and determination to overthrow a dictator, will now have to make a decision. What kind of a country do we want? Do we want one that's inclusive, that's non-retribution oriented? Do we want one that's secular? Or are we going to have a sectarian divide here? Are we going to engage in tribal warfare? They must now decide what they need. I think the United States position and that of the allies, our NATO allies, should be one of, how can we help you? What is it that you want us to help provide for you? Number one, obviously, to continue to wage the effort on the remnants of Gaddafi's force. Number two, you want stability. Number three, you're going to need some short-term cash flow. And number four, you're going to want to build an infrastructure, a system of law, so that you can function as a national country. That's what I think that that you can see from the outside. But the real issue is, what do they want? And we can't decide that for them. We can only be receptive to their request for help.
Secretary Cohen, you mentioned the word stability, and I want to broaden the conversation a little bit to get your perspective on what's going on in the Middle East. Bring in Egypt, bring in Syria and Iran, if you can. Stability in the region. What's next?
Well, what's next right now, of course, is Syria. I think we're limited in terms of what we can do, certainly from a military point of view, but I would hope that we would raise high the roof beams in terms of criticism at the international level, with potential economic sanctions going against the Syrian government for what they are doing to their people. I think that also should take into account what role Iran is playing, and I think their hand is a major role in both Syria, also in continuing in Iraq and Afghanistan as well. So I think the two big issues are Syria and Iran, and hopefully the international community will really come down hard on both Syria and Iran. More sanctions for both.
Now, Secretary Cohen, as a Washington participant for many years, we have a new Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta. Do you think that U.S. policy towards Hamas and Israel will change in terms of the relationship that Israel has or doesn't have with Iran?
I don't think that's going to change at all. I think the Iranians continue on their path to developing nuclear weapons. I think that the international community has a choice to make here, that all the choices are bad. We can either intensify the sanctions and get the Russians or the Chinese to join in those intensifications. We can try military operations with untoward consequences involved, or we can live with an Iranian bomb. Those options are not great. I think the one right now I would focus on would be to get the Chinese and the Russians to really come down hard on Iran. Ultimately, the failure to get those sanctions intensified, then the military option moves closer to the center of the table.
That military option, does that include an Israeli strike on Iran, in your opinion?
I think, obviously, if you're talking about military operations, that is one of the factors involved and one possibility. It's not one that I'm advocating and one that would necessarily be a great choice.
Right.
But nonetheless, the Israelis are looking at it from an existential point of view. The notion that Iran would get a nuclear weapon and possibly blackmail all of the other countries in the region.
We've got to leave it there. Secretary William Cohen,
Okay.
Thank you very much.